Hello, Internet. I'm David Bassano, Dr. D if you like. Today I want to address the question, what are human rights? Now, human rights are a very complex field of study. They can be approached from many different angles, like philosophical, religious, legal, social, political. Even the most basic concepts of human rights are surrounded by controversy and debate. What I want to do in this video is give you an outline of what human rights are and why they're so important. I'll also give you some sources for further study down in the description box so that you can do your own research. What are human rights? When we say human rights, what we typically mean is universal human rights. That is, the rights all human beings have regardless of gender, nationality, religion, or any other particular attribute. They are universal to all of us. They are considered inalienable. They cannot be taken away. And they are natural, or, if you like, God-given. They are egalitarian in that they apply equally to everyone. No one is more human than anyone else, so no one has more rights than anyone else. Human rights do not need to be earned. You automatically have them because you are human. Do human rights have limits? Sure. Your rights may not impinge on anyone else's rights. You don't have the right to lie to a jury or dump toxins into a river because that harms the community. As the old American phrase goes, your right to swing your fist stops at my face. What's the difference between human rights and civil rights? Civil rights are legal protections granted by a particular nation or state to its own citizens. Human rights are said to apply to all people around the world, regardless of nation. Okay, that all sounds nice in theory, but how can we claim to actually absolutely have these rights and anybody who says otherwise is wrong? The best answer to that is because the people want their rights. People want human rights because they make our lives much more livable, much more meaningful. When we have the right to live free from police abuse, we can live without anxiety about our physical safety. When we live without racism or other discrimination, it's easier for us to live with dignity. When we can practice our own religion or no religion, we're able to live with integrity and conscience. When we live without gender roles being forced on us, we can choose the life we want. With the right to free speech, we can express ourselves, and freedom of the media is necessary for a free society. Human rights improve our lives. This is not primarily a philosophical point. Without human rights, our daily life is much worse, much more painful. It is simply not a philosophical point of whether or not I want to get thrown in jail for practicing the wrong religion, or whether or not I want to watch my family be arrested by the police because we're from the wrong ethnic group. That's not open to debate. Every human being wants to live without abuse. And people certainly do care about their rights. They'll get them by one method or another. They're willing to die for them if needs be. And that's what gives universal human rights their power. The people demand them. Now, if you're a political realist, you may argue, well, sure, politicians may pretend to care about human rights just so that they can get elected, but do you think the politicians really care about your rights? All this talk of rights is just political nonsense. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that politicians and other leaders do not really care about your rights. It's the safest assumption. But since the people can fight for their rights, particularly in a democracy, then politicians need to respect the people's rights in order to get elected. Are politicians just hypocrites? My point is, who cares if they are? It's not important. What's important is whether or not the politicians can be forced into respecting human rights. Leaders come and go. They're not as important as our rights, which are permanent. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the history of human rights here. I want to discuss that in detail in future videos because it is a fascinating topic. But for now, let's just say that the idea of human rights was expanded particularly in the Age of Enlightenment in the West. The American Revolution used these new concepts of rights to create the first modern democracy. The entire concept of democracy makes no sense outside of the context of human rights. Other revolutions soon followed through the 18th and 19th centuries. But while the French and American revolutions put forth the concept of universal human rights, often without actually following them, the international community was not particularly interested in universal rights, the rights of people in other countries. Political leaders remained concerned only with what happened within one's own borders. What you do on your side of the border is none of my business. But that was going to change. Let's address the most commonly accepted expression of universal human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights signed at the United Nations in 1948. This is the world's best attempt at laying out a definition of universal human rights that everyone should follow in every nation around the world. The driving force behind this document was the greatest catastrophe in history, World War II, which claimed some 30 to 50 million lives. During the war, the anti-fascist countries of the United Nations needed to convince their people that this wasn't just another one of the endless power struggles between countries. To get their citizens' full commitment, they needed to present it as a battle between good and evil, and we're the good guys. But why are we the good guys? The reason, we told the world, is because we respect human rights and the fascists do not. That was an easy sell, given that we were up against Adolf Hitler. Also, when news of fascist atrocities came out, the Holocaust, the rape of Nanking, the Bataan Death March, the world was so shocked that many leaders pushed for international laws against such behavior. As the preamble to the UDHR puts it, disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. This is why, since World War II, respect for human rights has been taken as the source of legitimacy for all governments. You don't want your people to compare you to Hitler now, do you? So the anti-fascist leaders claimed the mantle of moral authority during the war by claiming that they were fighting for human rights. And World War II convinced those leaders that universal human rights could help prevent crimes against humanity. But the framers of the UDHR pointed out another advantage of human rights: peace and stability. Universal human rights are the best defense against civil wars and revolts. People who believe that their government legitimately protects their rights and interests have no reason to rebel. Again, from the preamble to the UDHR, it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. An international standard of human rights would make the world safer and more secure. And although the authors of the UDHR didn't mention it, it was certainly on the leaders' minds at the United Nations. Had human rights and democracy been strong enough in Germany and Japan, the fascists would never have been able to seize power in those nations and launch aggressive wars. So maybe we should be concerned with human rights in other countries after all. It may end up being our business in the end anyway. There are, of course, even more reasons to safeguard human rights. Nations make social and economic progress when respecting these rights. When all members of society, regardless of gender, race, and so on, are permitted to receive an education and pursue the careers of their choice, it unleashes the nation's full potential. Therefore, the health of humanity is largely synonymous with the health of universal human rights. That is why our civil rights, only applicable within the nation, are not enough. Those rights must apply to all humans. They must be universal. This leads to a very big issue in human rights debates, that of cultural relativism. Different cultures have different concepts of rights. Often, national leaders will argue that universal human rights are based philosophically and legally on European ideas of rights that don't fit their own culture. Therefore, they say, universal rights don't apply to them. They instead follow their own concepts of rights. They often insist that universal rights are just another method of Western dominance over the rest of the world, just another form of imperialism. However, consider this. Who gets to decide what the cultural norms are? Suppose you have a country where women are not allowed to participate in politics or go to school. The national leaders must, of course, all be men. The men say that it is their culture or their religion which determines that women are not allowed to have these rights. But what do the women say? Since they never get a chance to speak out in politics, we may never even know what they think. Is this just and moral? Don't the women get a say in what the cultural norms are? If not, are they really cultural norms, or just the excuse of the powerful who need to suppress people in order to protect their monopoly on power? This is why so many people are skeptical about cultural relativism and human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not a legal instrument with the force of law. It's a model for international rights to serve as a guide for other human rights laws, treaties, national constitutions, norms of international behaviors. So, what's actually in this thing? The Declaration has four philosophical foundations: dignity, liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Unlike earlier conceptions of human rights, the UDHR is not directly based on religious thought, because the theology of one religion might be incompatible with others. The idea is universality, to include everyone. That's why it uses a secular concept of universal human rights, so that different religions, as well as the non-religious, may use them. Besides the preamble, it contains 30 articles which spell out all the rights which human beings are held to have. I can't go into each article in the course of this video, but there is a link to the document in the description box below. The first 5 articles of the UDHR cover such basic rights as liberty and equality and guarantee freedom from torture and degrading punishment. The next 6 articles cover legal aspects of individual rights, such as equal protection under the law, the right to a fair trial, being presumed innocent until proven guilty, and protection against arbitrary arrest. Articles 12 through 17 cover individual rights vis-a-vis the community, such as freedom of movement, the right to a nationality, the right to start a family, and the right to own property. Next are freedom of thought, conscience and religion, opinion and expression, peaceful assembly, and the right to political participation. The last articles cover economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to work for fair wages, the rights to education, leisure, and healthcare. They also limit how these rights are to be upheld. For example, no one may exercise these rights where they might contradict the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Is the UDHR truly universal to all human cultures? Does everyone agree with it? No. The authors knew it couldn't be entirely universal, but it was their best attempt at creating a universal standard of human rights. And with the war and the Holocaust still fresh in everyone's minds, they figured something imperfect was definitely better than nothing at all. So the drafters knew there would be some resistance to their attempt at universality, and there was. The government of Saudi Arabia rejected Article 18, which says everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief. Disavowing Islam is considered a crime in many majority Muslim nations. South Africa objected to socioeconomic rights, perhaps because its system of apartheid denied those very rights to its black citizens. The USSR claimed that the declaration had an individualist slant, which was incompatible with socialism. Some Asian nations claimed that the philosophies of the UDHR were basically Western and bore little resemblance to Eastern philosophies, and therefore represented an attempt by the West to dominate international politics by imposing its own concepts of rights on the world. Nevertheless, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations, perhaps exactly because it was not legally binding. But as we'll see, that doesn't make it useless. Also, several Asian nations collaborated to create another international human rights standard called the Bangkok Declaration in 1993. This standard claims to better represent Asian political philosophy in that it focuses more on communal rights as espoused in Confucianism and Hinduism, and that as such it is a better fit for Asian nations than the Western-based UDHR. It is also rather suspect in terms of granting rights, but we'll look at that more in depth in a future video. Although the declaration itself is not a binding treaty, It has served as the basis for a great many human rights instruments and covenants, many of them with the force of law. The UDHR is the foundation for two binding UN human rights covenants: the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These three documents together are known as the International Bill of Human Rights. Other international treaties based on the UDHR include the American Convention on Human Rights, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the International Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, among others. The UDHR has also served as a guide to dozens of former colonies, which, upon gaining their independence, used the document to help form their own constitutions. It is also often referred to at the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has changed the world. Today, the standard basis for legitimacy of the nation-state is universal human rights. If you don't abide by human rights, you're not one of the good guys, and other countries will be suspicious of you. When the people of the world see evidence of your abuses in the news, they will question whether or not they want to send you foreign aid or buy your products or visit your country. Such consequences can be disastrous for dictators. Now, of course, we shouldn't be naive about what the leaders of the world were getting up to while they signed this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. While the democracies pushed for human rights standards after the war, the United Kingdom still ruled millions of people against their will around the world as part of their empire, and the United States was still practicing the apartheid of Jim Crow in the former Confederate states, without even mentioning what Joseph Stalin was getting up to. So you may well argue, words on paper. All these declarations and treaties are useless. The governments of the world won't actually follow through on the treaties. Look at Yugoslavia. Look at Rwanda. It's true that hypocrisy is always part of human rights and politics. Governments tend to be Machiavellian, utilitarian. But the words on paper mean something to the people of the world. Because the governments have ratified the human rights treaties, it exposes their hypocrisy when they then deny human rights. For an example, read about the Helsinki Effect, linked in the description box. It means that if your government doesn't respect rights, then you don't need to respect the government. The government is there to protect the rights of the people. If the government becomes the abuser, you have the right to fight back. Think about the power and influence of the United States Declaration of Independence in the US and around the world, where it inspired many other revolutions. Words on paper have great power if the people take them to heart. You'd be right to think of human rights as a battlefield, but it's one that we can't surrender. Our chances of living a peaceful and happy life depend on them. So that's a basic answer to the question, what are human rights? If you'd like to investigate further, I'll provide links to all the documents I mentioned in the video in the description box, plus a few suggestions for further reading. I'd like to leave you with a fascinating thought experiment to demonstrate the importance of human rights. Philosopher John Rawls proposed something called the veil of ignorance to determine what a just society would look like. It goes like this. You have permission to create human society from scratch. You're given godlike powers. You can create the world however you want. You get to create the economic system, the political system, the legal system. Create it in your mind however you want. There's just one catch. When you go to place yourself in this world you've created, you don't get to pick who you are. You could be any gender, any religion, any nationality, any race. Your placement will be random. Now go ahead and create that world of yours. I'll bet you create a world which respects human rights so that no matter who you are assured of living a happy life free from abuse. That's the point of universal human rights. See you next time.